Hello, and welcome to the Biomass Magazine podcast. I am your host, Anna Simet, and I'm here today with Luca Pandolfi of Woodland Biomass Innovations, whom I actually recently just met in person at the International Biomass Conference and Expo in Richmond. Luca, hello. It's nice to be chatting again.
Hi there, Anna. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
You bet. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. So, I think to begin, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how it led to Woodland Biomass Innovations? Kind of give us the backstory, maybe boil down just a bit.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. So my background, I actually was studying geography in college when I first came up with the idea. So I was in one of our environmental science classes, and we were learning about all sorts of cool new technologies that were going to be coming out, that were going to be, trying to reduce our impact, that are sustainably driven. And what was frustrating me in that class is that I really wasn't seeing any of that being commercialized in a meaningful way. And so what I thought about at the time is it would be really cool to start a company that specialized in commercializing existing technology, not necessarily in developing entirely new, technology, because I'm not really a chemist or a scientist by training or by background. I'm very much more on the marketing side, on the sales side of things. So I was like, let's take what those really smart chemists and engineers and scientists are coming up with in the lab, and let's create a company that's going to specialize in taking those products and bringing them to market in a meaningful way. And at the same time, I was becoming really interested in circular economies, was another concept that we were talking about in our various environmental classes. And so I kind of connected the two of let's see if we can figure out technologies that would allow us to create a circular process for producing transportation fuels. Because that was one of the key missing ingredients when you look at circular economies and how do we create economies that are more localized and on a smaller scale. One of the key missing ingredients is how do we do transportation in that scenario? And sure, there was a little bit of interest around electric vehicles, and there's a time and a place where electric vehicles make sense, but there's also a lot of situations where they don't necessarily make sense. And so I started looking at, can we produce a transportation fuel that works with existing cars and existing infrastructure that could be made from a renewable source product? And that was really the first step on my journey to starting Woodland Biomass Innovations. I from there joined with one of my professors at the college and did 1 year of independent study, learning about different fuel production processes using biomass as a feedstock. And at the end of that year of independent study, I synthesized all that research into a business idea that I ran at the Ithaca College Business Idea Competition, came first place. And that was really where my sort of entrepreneurial marketing sales background started, was in that after winning that competition, it signed me up for a series of classes about business development and how do you start a company. And so from there, I went to work for a few different startup companies after I graduated. Then I worked for some more established companies. And at the last company that I was working for before starting to work on Woodland Bio, I sort of ran the idea by the owner of the company and said, hey, I had this project I started working on in college. The concept was let's take a biomass source product and let's turn it into a transportation fuel. And specifically, I had narrowed in on this woody biomass as a source product because it's what's most available in Pennsylvania, and then producing a finished gasoline product at the outside. So that's essentially the system we've developed now at Woodland Biomass Innovations. What we're trying to raise capital to build is a woody biomass to gasoline facility. So what's coming out of our system is 87 octane gasoline. It works with existing cars and existing infrastructures. So consumers don't have to make any changes. You can use your existing vehicle. You can go to the gas station that you use right now. All that you're doing is you're picking a different pump. Instead of going for the traditional fossil fuel pump, now you'll pick the Woodland Bio pump, which will be locally produced, sustainably derived gasoline product.
Okay. So I guess one question I have is, so why have you chosen to work with woody biomass for the supply? Historically, it seems like it hasn't been the easiest material to work with when it comes to liquid biofuels. Luca, I've seen a lot of companies come and go in the 16 years I've been reporting in this industry, and some of them have been focused on wood to liquid biofuels, and the code has seemed difficult to crack from my perspective.
Yeah, it definitely has. I mean, there's a couple different processes for going from your biomass source product to a liquid fuel. And some of them have been more successful than others. So with our process, we're using a gasification-based process. And for people who work in the biomass space, they're probably familiar with gasification. So essentially, for those of your readers or listeners who aren't familiar with it, this is essentially where you're putting your biomass into an oxygen-starved, high-pressure, high-temperature environment, which turns the biomass into a product called syngas, synthetic gas. This is essentially a synthetic natural gas. And traditionally with gasification, then you'd burn that syngas, you'd heat up some water, you'd run a turbine, and you'd create electricity. That's where a lot of gasification is being applied right now. However, with our application, what we said is instead of burning the syngas, let's send it through a secondary process called GTL. And that stands for gas to liquid. It does literally what the name says it's going to do. It turns your combustible gas into a liquid fuel. And so these two technologies are relatively well developed. That's where I'd say is one of the distinguishing factors between us and what's been done previously in this biomass to fuel space, is that we're using existing technology that's already been proven on a commercial scale. And that way we're kind of minimizing the risk behind the operation. As far as the woody biomass, that's again minimizing risk. Now, there's a lot of interest right now. A lot of projects in this space are starting right with municipal solid waste. They're going straight to trash, and they're saying, let's turn trash into our, whether it's diesel or aviation fuel, whatever it is that they want to produce. And let's start with that source product. And the reason they say that is because you can get paid to take trash in. So now if you start a facility that's turning trash into fuel, you're getting paid on both ends. You're getting paid to take your trash in, you're getting paid to sell your fuel at the other side. So it makes sense at a surface level, but then when you dig into the detail as far as the feasibility of these projects, the issue with trash is that there's a lot of different materials included in there. There's some food waste mixed in with a battery. We're going to just say in this sample of trash, we have some battery and some food waste and some plastics mixed in together. The difference between that battery and the piece of food waste is astronomical, and the battery cannot go through the system. The food waste can't, the battery can't. So now you're talking about very sophisticated handling systems to be able to sort out the stuff that can't go through the system, like the battery, from the stuff that can, like the food waste. And then occasionally some of the batteries will get in anyway, and that's going to cause buildups in your system, which is going to require more maintenance, which can slow the whole process down. So we started with woody biomass because it's a fairly homogeneous product. When you compare it to that trash product or some of the other biomass sources that you can use, it's a very homogeneous product. The difference between a leaf and a piece of pulpwood is fairly minimal compared to the piece of food waste and that battery that I talked about earlier that are all mixed into one trash pile. So that's really where woody biomass was homogeneous. It's a fairly easy to handle material. It's non-hazardous. There is a hazard of fire, but that can be fairly easy mitigated. At the biomass conference, in fact, we saw a good collection of fire suppression systems that would work very well for our process. So the fire hazard is fairly easy to manage. It's all these other handling requirements that makes woody biomass a really good candidate for the first system. Then there's the sustainability side. I'm not going to get into that right now because that's a whole nother question. It's something I can talk about for another whole half an hour, is just of using our biomass source material. But the short of it is woody biomass is easy to handle, it's easy to process, and it's abundant in Pennsylvania's forests. And that's why we chose to work with it for the first facility.
Okay, great answer. So, we've been hearing so much about gas prices lately, especially in election year. Could you talk about how your concept could impact the price and stability of the gasoline supply?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So, yeah, traditionally we're dealing with a market where we're extracting material. Most of it's happening. Some of it's happening domestically here in the States, but a good chunk of it's also happening in other countries. And depending what those countries decide to do with their oil supply, that can dictate basically what the price of gasoline here is in the United States. So we don't really have as much control as we would like over our own price of gasoline here within the States. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the material we're using as the source for gasoline is coming from other countries, and we don't control what happens in those countries. So really what Woodland Bio is proposing is a much more stable environment where each local community would have control over their own source of energy, and by extension, the price of that source of energy. because the price of our woody biomass is not fluctuating dramatically. In fact, we're setting fixed prices with our suppliers for multiple years. So our supply material is at a fixed price. It's much more standard. It's less prone to fluctuations. We have a much more fixed break-even point, therefore, which means that our price doesn't really fluctuate. As long as the price remains over a certain price point, Woodland Bio is profitable and we're making good money. And from there, we don't really need to increase or decrease the price. So really, you're just talking about a lot more stable market for gasoline where you know what the price is. It'll remain relatively within that framework and not fluctuate as much as we're used to with our current market. So that's really one of the key things is stability, and then also bringing the price down because our process requires a lot less steps. It's a lot more localized on a smaller level. We're not talking about extracting material in Saudi Arabia, transporting it across the ocean, refining it in Texas, and then distributing it to market. We're talking about collecting material in Tioga County, bringing it to a facility in Tioga County where we turn it into gasoline that's then distributed to the Tioga County market. So a lot smaller of a footprint, a lot more simple, a lot more straightforward, less steps involved. And that, again, is going to lead to a much more stable price for gasoline when you're using woody biomass as your source product or any type of biomass. That's the other thing I want to mention just quickly is that we're starting with woody biomass at the very first facility for the reasons I mentioned earlier. But in the future, we hope to be building this sort of a facility over and over again. And with each new facility, we can design it to work with other types of biomass. That's where in the future, we hope we'll be working a little bit with some agricultural residuals. We hope that there'll be a facility working with sewage at some point. So that's where we're starting with woody biomass. But in the future, we can work with other types of biomass. And that, again, is just about what's available locally and what has a stable price, because that's going to allow us to produce a stable price on gasoline and a little bit cheaper as well than existing fossil fuels.
So let's hear more about plans for your first facility. Obviously, proof of concept is really important. How far away are we from that?
Yeah, that's a good question we get frequently. So we're in engineering right now. We're going through a 3-phase engineering process on the project. We've completed phase 1 and we're currently raising capital for phase 2. So in total, engineering is expected to take another 6 months to 1 year to complete. Once engineering is complete, the lead time for the facility itself is between 2 and 3 years. So in total, you're looking at something between 3 to 4-ish years to actually start operation from today. But that's just the first facility, as you said. I mean, from there, we want to take that exact same design that we're preparing for Tioga County. You can take that exact same facility design and we should be able to copy and paste it across different areas of Pennsylvania, with the only limitation being where is there wood. So that's where this one takes a bit longer because it's the first one to prepare and get up and running. But after the first one's up and running, we're hoping that after that, we'll be able to implement more rapidly with future systems.
Have you done any smaller scale, like batch or demo versions?
Our technology providers have. It would just be repetitive for us to do it because our technology suppliers already have the pilot up and running. So yes, that has been done.
Okay. And did I see something on your website about biochar?
That's correct. Yeah, that's everybody loves biochar. It's a really exciting. So yeah, we do plan on working with biochar. It's a co-product from our facility. So we do want to emphasize we are a gasoline company. That's where our money comes from. That's how we make a profit. But we do produce biochar as a co-product from the facility. And it's just a really exciting material to be involved with. I'm working actually on several projects related to biochar in Pennsylvania, just helping to develop those markets in Pennsylvania because there's so many applications between steel production, very large agricultural scene, and concrete and construction, animal, raising different kinds of animal. There's a lot of different applications for biochar in Pennsylvania, and we're working with a couple companies who are already producing biochar, helping them develop those markets and those applications for biochar.
Very cool. So I'm about at the end of my questions. Luca, what else do you want to add before we wrap things up?
Join us on this journey of creating gasoline from various types of biomass. So if this is something that interests you, I'd encourage you to join one of our webinars. We have a few webinars scheduled throughout April, and we'll be doing a few every month. So visit our website, www.woodlandbio.com. I'd love to see some of you on our webinars where we talk through the whole project. It's an hour long. We go from top to bottom, everything that's going in and out of the system, how it's designed, the finances. So I really hope we'll be seeing some people joining us there. But otherwise, yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity. I hope we'll be continuing to work a lot with Biomass Magazine and the Biomass Conference. It's been a great experience going there at the beginning of last month. So really appreciate everything that you guys are doing. And thanks for having me on today.
Absolutely. Really enjoyed our chat, Luca. And thanks so much for coming on and telling our listeners more about Woodland Bio.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Anna. You have a great afternoon.
You too. And to our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to send me a note with any topics that you are interested in hearing more about on the Biomass Magazine podcast. Always open to ideas. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time.